Hi, this is Lacey. Welcome to my presentation on social exchange model. Basically, what I've tried to do with my model is to combine both individual and group level theories to understand what occurs within an organization in terms of communication and interaction. The reason I was interested in this is that several years ago our school had a communication audit, and one of the findings from that audit was that we have communication silos, so that faculty only talk to faculty, administration only talks to administration, support staff only talks to support staff. And basically what occurs then is that there's not a lot of interaction between those groups, and certainly the organization is not as effective as it could be. So starting with the individual level theories, first of all, looking at the leader-member exchange. And as you likely remember, the leader-member exchange, or LMX, looks at the social exchanges, and the focus there is on the relationship between leaders and followers. And basically what happens is it entails this development and maintenance of mature relationships, as Grain and Old Ben explain them. And how they explain mature relationships is that those relationships are reciprocal and they are emotional. And so the domains there that are include the leader, the follower, and the relationship itself. And of course, these relationships can be both high and low quality relationships. So what we see is if we have interaction between a leader and a member, they may have high quality interaction with trust, obligation, and respect that occurs, or one or more of those factors may be absent within that particular relationship. And as Anand, Hoon, Linden, and Gritharthy point out, this can be multi-level, so it does not have to focus simply on the individual, but it can look at the dyad, so the leader and the member, or it can look at the group level, or a combination of groups as well, so that it actually has that multi-level aspect, and you can view it in that way. That then takes us to the aspect of emotions, and Ashkenazi explains that emotions and emotional intelligence are important to leadership. Essentially, emotional intelligence entails the ability to perceive, process, understand, and manage emotions in the self and the other. And this includes the factor of relationships and that aspect of LMX quality. So Johnson points out that the emotional connection between leaders and followers will result in higher LMX quality and will oftentimes result in higher performance by the particular follower. George also explains that higher quality relationships, or LMX, results from higher EQ, or higher emotional intelligence, and involves instilling knowledge and appreciation of work, that these relationships will be more likely to generate excitement, cooperation, and trust. So you'll notice some of those factors of trust, obligation, respect comes into play here as well with emotional intelligence. It can also result in flexibility within a particular group. And again, here it can be multi-level. So what we see with LMX and EQ is that Ashkenazi and Humphrey point out the levels of analysis here. So level 3 actually involves the interpersonal relationship between individuals, and level 4 moves up to team member exchanges. So we can see again that multi-level aspect there. And as we move from the individual to the group, what we see is something considered emotional contagion. And Johnson explains that emotional contagion is this automatic and unconscious transfer of emotion between individuals. And Barset explains that we interpret others' emotions. Basically, we mimic facial expressions, we mimic particular speech patterns, and that emotion then moves from the leader to the follower to the group itself. And there's all kinds of fascinating, very interesting research out there on emotional contagion that I kind of got a little bit lost in. So there's a lot of research out there if you're interested in that. And again, what we see is through LMX, through the exchanges between members, between leaders and members, there is this transfer of emotion that occurs. And having that high emotional intelligence will shape the comfort level, the emotional mood of a particular group, so that we need leaders with high emotional intelligence that will then in turn shape the group. That, of course, brings us to this aspect of group level theories. And we've discussed a lot of these, but one thing we haven't really gotten into much in this class is social network theory. Basically, social network theory is a focus on formal and informal patterns of communication. So the actual ability to understand what occurs and how communication occurs within a group. And we can have network mapping that will actually visually show those particular patterns of communication. Balkundi explains that these social networks emphasize relationships between the actors, and so just as we saw with LMX, there is this idea of connections and ties, and it moves from the leader and the individual to the organizational level. And so Granovetter explains that these ties involve time, emotional intensity, so we have that emotional aspect come up again, intimacy, and reciprocity, so that again that idea of exchange and reciprocity becomes important. So within that, what we see are networks are these groups of individuals that are connected through ties. And again, we can see that it can be studied at the group level, or you can look at collections of groups, which would be the organizational level. Within the networks, there's an aspect of network density, which is simply the number of ties that are within the network, how many individuals are interacting together. And Finnegan and Daly explain that the increased number of ties results in more open communication, higher amounts of interaction, and because of that we see less hierarchical structure and are more likely to see informal leadership that comes about. Then Hatala and Letta and Bavasso explain that as we see fewer ties in a network, less interaction, there oftentimes will form cliques, and there will be lower trust, and that's where we see these communication silos come about. But from this network density, as more people interact, Daly and Finnegan explain that it will actually increase social capital, because what will happen is that there's these relationships and resources that are exchanged among individuals within the network. And within that, of course, we see more shared leadership. As density increases, we have more leaders coming into play, and that interaction comes about and creates shared knowledge. And shared knowledge will actually create what are called communities of practice. So as individuals work together, it creates an actual community within this particular network. So of course, from shared knowledge and shared leadership takes us over to this aspect of knowledge sharing. And Hatala and Letta explain that knowledge is better managed as a public good. So we see that strong social networks will actually increase social capital because people are interacting. And what we see here, especially in the educational field, is that this exchange of information will increase social capital within the organization as well. And if you are interested more, Daly's social network theory and educational exchange offers several examples of how this occurs within a group and analyzing networks. So basically, with knowledge sharing, is that what one individual knows can benefit their colleagues, can benefit the organization as a whole. And Nanaka points out that as increase in interaction will actually enhance the capacity to learn and overcome individual constraints, because you have all of these individuals coming together and sharing this particular knowledge. So we have this interaction, and Weick again explains that shared knowledge occurs through communication. So communication is essential to have this aspect of knowledge sharing. Then, as networks share knowledge, what we see is organizational learning, which Crossan, White, and Lane explain is a multi-level process as information goes from the individual to the group to the organization. The organization as itself will grow and learn more, most likely through the informal networks, as we saw with the social network theory. And the key here is that influence is needed in order for these things to occur, which of course brings us back to LMX and to the aspect of emotional intelligence. So if you combine all of these theories and look at the social exchange model that I'm trying to do here, is that there is an interplay that occurs so that each particular component affects the others. For example, emotional intelligence will impact the exchanges that occur within the relationships, and that of course will affect network density, how many of those relationships are formed, how strong those ties are, and that will influence the knowledge sharing that occurs within a particular organization. So if you have a leader that has low emotional intelligence, it may be that the followers or the members within that group will become very separate. There won't be a lot of interaction that occurs. Knowledge sharing will be much lower, and you're more likely to have those communication silos come about. Within this, there's also multi-level analysis, and so you can actually look at the individual relationships, you can look at the broader network and conduct network mapping, or you can look at groups of networks, which would be the organizational level. And the idea here again is that it is descriptive. You're trying to understand and identify the health of the organization or the health of an individual network by looking at these individual components and how they interact and affect one another. So it's very much interactive. I was going to try to actually draw a model until it basically was just arrows going everywhere, because all of these interact and affect one another. And again, the idea of having, say, a leader with low emotional intelligence, then members are not as likely to interact with that leader. They may become very separated from one another, which is something that we have seen at our college. And there's going to be a lot less interaction, which of course means much lower levels of knowledge sharing, which will hurt the organizational learning as well. And so all of these actually interplay with one another. And so if you want any more information on any of these, like I said, there's tons of research out there on each of these individual theories, and it's possible to look at each of these and understand how they interact with one another in a lot of ways. So I've included some of the sources that I have used, or all of the sources that I have referenced here, but there's much more out there. As I said, I had a tendency to get a little bit lost and really want to just focus on research and each of these individuals and not really bring them all together. But there's really, really great information out there on each of these particular areas, and I think that the aspect of research and application would benefit from tying these components together. Maybe just looking at LMX will not be sufficient, or just looking at the factor of the network will not be sufficient. But if you can look at all of those together as a whole, you can see how they all interact and then hopefully increase the health of the organization and the quality of communication and social exchanges that occur within the organization. If you have any questions or any comments, I would certainly appreciate feedback that you might have. Thank you.